Welcome into another episode of College Football Insiders. I'm your host, Richard Johnson. I'm joined by my guys, Shehan Raja and Chris Hummer. Fellas, let's get right into it. The news of the day, the news of probably the season so far in college football. Mike Gundy is out as Oklahoma State head coach. The official press release says that Mike Gundy and Oklahoma State have parted ways. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later on. Doug Meacham will reportedly be the interim coach. Gundy was an assistant coach in Stillwater from 2001 to 2004. He was 170-90 in 21 seasons as the head coach of the Pokes, the second longest tenure as an FBS head coach, currently winningest head coach in Oklahoma State history. 8 10-win seasons from 1986 through 1989. He also played quarterback there. He finished his playing career as the Big 8 Conference career passing leader. The last few years, however, not so great for Oklahoma State. Lost 11 straight games versus FBS teams, went 3-9 in 2024, including an 0-9 stretch in conference play. That snapped a streak of 18 straight winning seasons for the Cowboys. And rock bottom came Friday night when Oklahoma State lost at home to in-state Tulsa 19-12. Shehan, I'll go to you first. You're my Big 12 guy. This is seismic in the timing, but obviously not the decision in and of itself. I think we all figured this was coming at some point this season.
Yeah, I mean, this could have, frankly, even have come last season after they went 3-9. But the reality of the situation is that Oklahoma State coach Mike Gundy is probably the second greatest coach in Big 12 history, right behind Bob Stoops is probably the only other guy. Second all time in Big 12 wins, 20 plus years with the program. But this is something that I think was years in the making. I go back to, you could even go back to maybe after the 2021 season when they play for a Big 12 title, get stopped on the last play of the game. From that moment on, after they lose Jim Knowles to Ohio State, they lose Spencer Sanders, who transfers to Ole Miss. They really haven't been the same type of program. Now, of course, in 2023, Ollie Gordon goes on the magical run, 1,700 yards, and gets them back to the Big 12 title game. But even if you look at stuff like advanced numbers, I mean, they were in the 40s that year in SP+, not necessarily the top 15 where we had become accustomed to seeing them. And there's going to be a lot speculated and pointed to about Gundy's, struggles over the past couple of years, but you can't ignore his struggles to adjust to the modern era, whether that be through NIL. We heard from Gundy himself that over the last 3 years, the program has spent approximately $7 million combined in NIL. Needless to say, that is an embarrassing number. Whether it's the transfer portal, where they weren't necessarily aggressive in trying to acquire until the past couple of years. And this year, they headed into a season with 65 new players, 30 of which did not arrive until the summer. And when they took the field, they looked like a team that had no idea what they wanted. Another thing to just also mention as well, they had the same assistant coaches for a very long time. A lot of buddies of Mike Gundy who had been with him for 10 plus years, even as performance was slipping. This offseason, they fire 9 of the 10 assistant coaches and bring in a whole bunch of new guys. And again, this is a roster in a 69-3 loss to Oregon and in a 19-12 loss to Tulsa, the first loss at home to Tulsa since 1951. That looked like a roster who frankly did not know each other in any meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said, Shehan, this is the end of an era. I think this is the end of one of college football's real great personalities of the 21st century. This is somebody that, if you're even a little familiar with college football casually, you know Mike Gundy. There is some irony to this firing happening one day after the anniversary of his I'm a man, I'm 40 rant. That man is now 58 years old. And he's unemployed in a way I think a lot of people around that program are very surprised about. I, like a lot of people on our staff, was texting with people around Oklahoma State when this news started to leak out via some beat reporters there. And the staff, like his assistant coaching staff, had not been informed when that news started to leak. I think they were getting ready for practice. So there is a lot of surprise around Stillwater right now with the timing of that firing. It's a very interesting one, given that they let him go through his usual game week press conference on Monday. Like, you never see coaches fired on Tuesday of a game week. But it was always interesting for Mike Gundy and his tenure, and his firing also came at a very interesting time. And I think it signifies that Mike Gundy maybe threw a little bit of a line in the sand, and so did Oklahoma State. And the two sides basically decided to part ways. It's certainly a big change in college football, and I think it signifies in a lot of ways the things that used to work in the sport may not work anymore.
Yeah, I had one industry source text me and say the assistants I just spoke to were stunned in the aftermath before the official statement came out. Chris, it kind of echoes what you're saying.
I texted an assistant there, and he would be like, "That's news to me." When I was like, "Have you heard anything about him being fired?"
I spoke to just an agent as well, another agent who literally texted me back, nothing like it as far as Tuesday firing, I should say, is concerned. The presser will be later this afternoon. It's incredible to me personally that this happened like this. You have, again, the rock bottom game Friday night where they lose to Tulsa, and as I believe a 2-touchdown favorite at home to Tulsa. And then you have all day Saturday and all day Sunday, which, if, in my opinion, if you knew you were going to do this after the rock bottom loss, you do this at 12:01 Eastern time Sunday afternoon or 1:01 Eastern time on Sunday afternoon. And you just bury it in the college games that are Saturday or Sunday. Monday, I think, is interesting because, as Chris stated, that is the anniversary of I'm a Man, I'm 40. And I do really wonder if part of the calculus was, I guess, once they hadn't done it on Sunday, that you just get through Monday so you don't have, frankly, the embarrassing headline of you fired him on the anniversary of one of the most infamous press conferences of all time that Gundy does not really acknowledge and does not really talk about. He does not have the fun with it that we all do kind of in the media looking back on it.
Until this year when he did a cellular wireless commercial that alluded to it, which, like, I mean, there was a little piece of that when that happened, I talked to some people who were like, this feels like Mike Gundy jumping the shark. This feels like him being like,
that's the thing that was jumping the shark.
Well, but there's jumping the shark for him, and then there's, this is just like him just throwing in the towel. Like, okay, well, screw it. This is the last time I'm going to be the head coach at Oklahoma State. Let's just go out guns blazing right now.
I don't think it was talking to people around that program. I do not think that was jumping the shark for Mike Gundy. I think that is Mike Gundy in some ways getting one over on his own program. You'll notice there were no logos, Oklahoma State logos in that commercial featured. And that is, I know, sound that universities tried to use in the past with Mike Gundy for sponsorships. And I think Mike Gundy, as Shehan said, knew the end was near. And I mean, $15 million is a lot, but like, you take those checks when you can get them. And I think Mike Gundy was happy to take a check. And I think it does show to an extent how Mike Gundy thought his career at Oklahoma State could be coming close to an end. And that's understandable given that he basically had to rally the troops last year in December just to save his own job. Like, he was going to be fired by the board, and he saved his job by getting boosters to rally behind him. And I don't know. I mean, that would have been, it's interesting how things can change in 9 months. And we'll get into this in a second, but he changed a lot about that program this year. Obviously too little, too late, but it is interesting to see his career come to an end without a lot of his longtime lieutenants by his side at Oklahoma State, because he made those changes. And I don't really think the program gave him a lot of time to implement them necessarily.
Yeah, one of them, Casey Dunn, for instance, longtime offensive assistant, was offensive coordinator over the last few years, was out at the end of last season. At the end of last season, Mike Gundy reworked his contract, or his contract was reworked for him, I should probably say, is the more proper nomenclature. He basically kicked into the NIL fund. Sort of, I don't know if demotion's the word. That's probably not the right word. But he took a haircut. And I think that was probably to save his job at the time. That was at least my read on the situation. We have some quotes from the statement in and of itself that we can put up on the board here. But Oklahoma State Athletic Director Chad Weiberg said, Cowboy football reached an unprecedented level of success and national prominence under Coach Gundy's leadership. I believe I speak for OSU fans everywhere when I say that we are grateful for all he did to raise the standard and show us all what is possible for Oklahoma State football. Look, Oklahoma State was a doormat in the Big 12 before he took this job from Les Miles. Les Miles kind of got it booted up a little bit in the early 2000s, something of a blip. But Mike Gundy took this to heights that were just unbelievable. for that program. Won a Big 12 championship, got to the doorstep of a BCS national championship. One thing he didn't really do was beat Oklahoma with any reliability. But other than that, he pretty much took Oklahoma State to heights that it had never been. Won Fiesta Bowl, all these different things. Really, honestly, was at the forefront of the paradigm shifting of the sport that the Big 12 was itself at the vanguard of in the mid 2000s with all the offense. And then he did, to his credit, have a pivot. The greatest coaches do pivot after schematic ingenuity. And Mike Gundy did that. Now, again, the magic ran out here, but for a while there, he had pivoted, and he was something of a guy that you looked at as an incubator and a developer of assistant coaches and a reliable evaluator of assistant coach talent. Again, the luck ran out there, but for a while there, that was the calling card, Shehan.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, talk about some of the guys who came through the program. Of course, Jim Knowles was at Duke, but really made a name for himself at Oklahoma State before going to Ohio State. Todd Monken came through there. Dana Holgerson was his offensive coordinator. Even a couple of years at the very beginning of his tenure, Larry Fedora was a rising name that came through this program. The offensive coordinator who came from Division II Shippensburg. I'm blanking on his name right now. Mike Yursich, right? Goes to Texas, goes to Penn State, right? Like, he is searched everywhere. And I will say he tried that a little bit in the 2020s as well. His hit rate just wasn't as high as it needed to be. I think that, going from Jim Knowles, one of the best defensive coordinators in the sport, to Derek Mason, who was okay, but there were notable deficiencies, to Brian Nardo, who came up from Division II as well. He wasn't ready for that moment. So I think that you can see some of Gundy trying some of these same things that worked for him over the course of multiple years, and they just didn't this time. Something else I'll mention, though, as well is, when do you think the last time Oklahoma State had a wide receiver drafted in the NFL draft was? Do you guys know the year?
Wow. I don't know the year. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
2017. It was at Washington.
So they had one more after that, Tylan Wallace in 2021,
Wow.
But that was the last time. And this was a program that produced two first-round picks at receiver, 3 Biletnikoff wins, 2 of them, of course, going to Justin Blackman, and also James Washington, like you mentioned. So, this was a program that had done it at receiver for so many years. You mentioned Casey Dunn. He was the receivers coach for a lot of those guys before he was promoted to offensive coordinator, something he just unfortunately didn't handle very well. But you mentioned the pivot. They go from being a receiver quarterback program with Brandon Weeden and Mason Rudolph to being a running back program. Ollie Gordon, a couple years ago, of course, comes through. Chuba Hubbard comes through, rushes for over 2,000 yards. So, like you said, I think that Mike Gundy's career in so many ways is defined by that innovation and moving with the times. And again, even on defense, I think that there were times that he stepped up to that moment. And that's what makes this moment so striking. And frankly, forget today, forget September 23rd, 2025. Go back to December, whenever they're making those hires, right? I understand you want to try to play it safe to a certain extent, but he brought in Doug Meacham, a former assistant of his who had frankly been out of major coaching for a little while to run his offense, and Todd Grantham, who had basically been out of coordinating on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that while this roster was probably in trouble regardless, the innovation was kind of gone. He tried to play it safe to a certain extent, and this roster, unfortunately, was just frankly not good enough to allow him to do that.
By the way, real quick, before we transition kind of maybe to some other elements of Mike Gundy and what's next for Oklahoma State, I do want to point out that the last game Texas played in the Big 12 was in the Big 12 championship game in 2023, and the team they played in 2023 was Oklahoma State for that Big 12 title.
Yep.
That's how quick things can change in college football. And that's how quick things can change under you if you're a head coach like Mike Gundy, who's been at the top of the sport for so long. You have to adapt in college football. You have to change in college football. And I think the end of Mike Gundy's tenure is going to be defined by his unwillingness to change. And that's what this comes down to. This is a man who was at the top of the sport for a very long time and didn't make the necessary changes quick enough. And it cost him his job.
Yeah, I think when Shehan talks about innovation, It's the innovation that ran out. It's the inability and the unwillingness. I want to be very clear. We have to be.
That's the key word. It's unwillingness.
Yep. We have to be crystal clear about Mike Gundy. This is not like it happened to him. It is not like Mike Gundy is not an agent in his own demise, because he is. It is the unwillingness to adapt and the fierce resistance personally that Mike Gundy had to adapt. You can dislike NIL, you can dislike rev share, you can dislike having to deal with players and agents and parents who want money and kids who have the handout. That's all well and good. Your personal opinion is fine. Where it's not fine is when you have to lead a program to win football games at a high level. When that is the nature of things, it doesn't matter what you think about NIL. It doesn't matter what you think about players being paid. It doesn't matter what you think about rev share. If you want to win at the level Oklahoma State has been accustomed to under Mike Gundy, you have to play ball a certain way financially. He refused to do it, and he didn't do it until it was way too late. And now you saw that the magic ran out.
And just fundamentally, the job from the beginning of history until 2020 and the job from 2021 on is a different job. We're seeing it at Oklahoma State. We saw it obviously at Clemson. They're trying to work through that right now. But the old way of doing things is just simply not going to be the status quo anymore. And the coaches that are resistant to that are going to be the coaches who can't thrive in this era.
This should have been, or could have been, I should say, Oklahoma State's conference. Chris Hummer just told you the last game that Texas played in the Big 12 was against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. Texas and Oklahoma exit stage right, and we all sit and say, well, who's going to take this league by the scruff of the neck? Could have been Utah, could have been – no. It's Texas Tech. And what is it, Shehan, that Texas Tech has done, particularly in the last few months, that Oklahoma State refused to do?
Yeah, it's spend, and it's also more particularly spend aggressively and in a very pointed way. They have an exact strategy of cap management and roster management of how they want to build the team. Oklahoma State.
Wow, I think a lot of people would love to have Texas Tech's cap management abilities from this cycle.
Well, yeah, but like another big part of it is, right, like they haven't been shy about it. We are going to, relative to how much money we have, we're going to spend a disproportionate amount of it. Forget the 25 roster. I'm talking ahead as well. We're going to spend as much of our money as we can on the trenches. And we are going to approach it in that sense. And yeah, we'll take a flyer at receiver. We'll take a flyer even at quarterback, frankly, with mid-3 star kids. But you know what? Where we're going to freaking kill everybody is we're going to have the best offensive lineman and best defensive lineman that the Big 12 has ever seen. And at this point, right, again, 2025 and that whole cycle aside, Oklahoma State does not have a clear strategy for roster building in this era. And I think that, frankly, if the team was bad this year, because look, realistically, they came off of 3-9 and 0-9 in Big 12 play. There was no scenario where they were going to suddenly be 10-win Oklahoma State again. That's not really the point. What the first couple games of this season showed more than anything is we don't have a plan. We're just trying to get the best kids that we possibly can who are willing to come here, and that's about it. We're not trying to hit a timeline. We're not trying to thrive at something in particular. We are just out there doing stuff. And I think that maybe more than anything else is the reason that Oklahoma State simply couldn't look to Mike Gundy long term.
We're going to take a quick break here in the College Football Insiders. When we come back, more on Oklahoma State and Mike Gundy.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. I think as we kind of turn the page with what does Oklahoma State do now, I don't really know if you can divorce what's coming next with the current climate, because there is just so much uncertainty. Whereas I think you got a situation with Virginia Tech and UCLA, all three of the now open jobs in college football have intense uncertainty about who is running the show here, so to speak. Oklahoma State Athletic Director Chad Weiberg, again, he was quoted in this statement which means it leads you to believe he's going to be in the mix here. But guys, he quite literally does not have a contract right now. He is working outside of a contract as an at-will employee, which is just incredible. Oklahoma State.
Also, just real quick with Chad Weiberg, long-term confidant of Mike Gundy. This is somebody that Mike Gundy is very close to, and in some ways represents a different era of the school and the administration.
Oklahoma State also does not have, as you are aware, the guy whose name is on the stadium. T. Boone Pickens died a few years ago. And so Oklahoma State doesn't really have this big swing and booster that was integral in getting the entire athletic department into, at the time, what was a new age by spending a disproportionate amount of money. He's no longer around. So how is it that Oklahoma gets into the next phase of college athletics without a big swing and booster like that?
So, and I actually want to take you back. I think that's a really good question, because 2019 is when T. Boone Pickens passes. And I think there's been a little oversimplification of like, well, T. Boone passed and suddenly Gundy's not good anymore. I don't think it's that simple, but
because they had beef. They had beef and they went back and forth. That was not exactly the happy marriage Dan Lanning has with Phil Knight, for instance.
But it probably is one of those situations where it's like, what do you mean my enemy's dead? What do you mean? Who am I going to fight with now? But anyway, 2019, T. Boone dies, right? And then 2021, Mike Holder, the longtime athletic director, retires. He had been the athletic director since 2005. I believe he was the athletic director who hired Gundy. If not, it was very soon after. Was with them the entire time, was a huge part of their success. Very good athletic director. And like you said, Chad Weiberg is kind of Gundy's guy who gets promoted to that role in 2021. He was an internal promotion. And he's done a reasonably fine job, but again, somebody who very much is of Mike Gundy, let's say. So that's happening at this moment where all of this is going on. Well, let me take you a step further outside as well.
By the way, I just want to point out, Chad Weiberg, I think, is the third lowest paid Power 4 athletic director in the country.
Not a huge
I think it's $300,000. I believe it's
$300,000, really? Oh, I did not know that it was like that. But yeah, I mean, just kind of like a clear indicator of like, hey, this maybe isn't their big guy, right? Like Mike Gundy is their big guy. So all that to say, let me take you a step further out for a second. They make a presidential hire a couple years ago. Casey Shroom, she's very well liked. She does a good job, but about a year ago, she got into some hot water and some disagreements over some educational innovation lab or something like that. And the board pushes her out. And this is like a huge shock to everybody at the time. They've since claimed, oh, there was financial mismanagement, whatever. But point is, this pretty respected president at this university gets pushed out. So they've changed their president in a controversial decision in the past calendar year. They also internally promoted. So you have this internal promotion president, this internal promotion athletic director, no clear alpha in the room of the Board of Regents necessarily. So like you said, it really complicates the situation of who actually makes a decision like this, because Mike Gundy, until today, was the most powerful person on campus by a pretty good margin. And so that leaves a huge power vacuum when you're trying to decide what comes next.
Chris Hummer has candidates. He's got candidates for the job. Again, we want to express it is the very, very, very early stages. The guy has been parted ways with, I guess is what they said. The guy's been parted ways with for just a few hours here. But this is kind of how this goes, where you start to get on the phone, all three of us, and you start to just talk with people in the industry, people on campus, and who makes sense. Chris Hummer had a great list earlier today at cbssports.com. I'll let you kind of rattle off some of these names as we go forward here.
Yeah, I will say it is very early, and I need to emphasize very, very early. But these are names that industry sources have brought up. And it's worth noting, administrators, search firms, and all these people aren't doing this in a vacuum. They go into a search, kind of have an idea of who at least is going to be on their list to consider. Like back channeling in some of these cases already happened, at least a little bit, like over this last, really for Oklahoma State, it goes back to last year when they thought they were going to fire Mike Gundy. So this is a list that I think has some names that are going to have some legitimacy over time. We can talk about them more individually in a second. I'm just going to run through them. Texas State head coach G.J. Kinne, former Tulsa football player, quarterback there, very familiar with the area. Colin Klein at Texas A&M, the offensive coordinator, K-State great. Dana Holgorsen, Shehan mentioned him earlier, former Oklahoma State offensive coordinator, Nebraska's offensive coordinator currently. I think he's going to get some attention this cycle if he wants to jump back in. A name to know is definitely Atlanta Falcons offensive coordinator Zach Robinson, former Mike Gundy quarterback, going to have a lot of backing from boosters at Oklahoma State. Barry Odom, Purdue's head coach, Oklahoma native. If this job had come open a year ago, I think he would have been at the top of that list potentially. Now there's a buyout to kind of overcome there. And I don't know if Oklahoma State's necessarily a better job than Purdue in this climate. We can debate that more if y'all want later. Eric Morris.
That's a little. We'll definitely talk about that later.
I would side with Oklahoma State for what it's worth, but Eric Morris, North Texas, they're 4-0 right now. I think if you're looking to bring over a head coach, offensive coordinator, quarterback combo, I might look at North Texas if I was a school in need of a coach to cycle. Shannon Dawson at Miami, going to have a lot of interest to cycle their offensive coordinator. Will Stein, their offensive coordinator. And I think even like maybe if things get weird, like Rashad Samples at Oregon, former Oklahoma State football player himself before he transferred to Houston. Oregon's going to have a lot of attention on that coaching staff this year for potential head coach candidates. Those are all people in the industry have brought up.
Yeah, I would also I think that the name to note, I think, is Zach Robinson, because I think how Zach Robinson's, candidacy, so to speak, for this job goes, I think will kind of show you a little bit of where the wind is blowing with who's kind of steering the ship here. Like Chris, and I'm wondering if you've kind of heard similar. If this is like a booster run show, I think Zach Robinson's name is like the front of the line. And it's like if he tells us no. I don't know if you've heard any different, Chris.
I think it depends on what booster you talk to there. Like any search, boosters all have their individual friends. I think Dana Holgorsen would be a very popular name among boosters there. Same thing with Barry Odom, if it goes that way. But holistically, yes, I tend to agree. Zach Robinson is a name that's going to have a ton of backing there from the booster class. He is sort of a soft transition out of the Mike Gundy era, if you will, given his ties there. And I mean, it's in Mike Gundy's contract. He gets to consult on the next hire. So maybe he consults with Zach Robinson as part of that.
Oh, man. Yeah, yeah, it's in there. It's in there.
So I do think, just to take a half step back, right? I do think that trying to gauge the attractiveness of this job is interesting, because we've heard, obviously, like, this is not one of the most well-moneyed programs in the country. That's not a secret. It also is obviously more well-moneyed than $7 million over 3 years. But again, we are looking around the landscape right now, and Arkansas looks like it's going to come open, right? How do you compare it to a job like that? Obviously, Florida will certainly be ahead in line, but I think Virginia Tech is an interesting comp. Maybe you're just pulling from different buckets at that point, but and while I think it's frankly insulting to me a little bit for Oklahoma State to be compared to Purdue being, at the bottom of a conference versus middle to upper level of a conference.
Right. But Shehan, the conference that Purdue is in right now is in a much better shape.
There's no question about it, right? But this is the question again, when you, for example, make the comparison to Arkansas. If you as a coach are making a decision, you are having to decide, are you going to be at the school that is 14th out of 16th in your conference for slightly more money, but not a crazy amount more money, or would you rather be at a place like Oklahoma State that has the resource and backing to be a consistent playoff contender? If you're
does it have the resource and backing?
I think it does.
Well,
I think it does.
I think this is actually a really important thing to think about with this job, and we'll find out how Oklahoma State thinks about their own job based on who they go after as candidates. Because there's two ways you can go about hiring a person if you're Oklahoma State. You can go get the up and comer like GJ Kinne, who is on a fast track in college football head coaching circles. And if he goes to Oklahoma State, frankly, if things go well, he won't be there for a particularly long time. He will be a SEC or a Big Ten head coach. Or you can go out and get somebody who wants to view Oklahoma State as a destination job, a stable job, and a place you can stay at and win over a long period of time. Obviously the goal for both sides of that is to win. But I think there are two different types of candidates you can approach in that way. And we'll see what Oklahoma State prioritizes based on who they go after as their first tier of candidates. Because there is a world in which Oklahoma State goes from being a destination job, a place that Mike Gundy stayed at for 2 decades, to a bit of a stopgap job for people as they go places and try to move up the ladder. And it's fair to say that's Purdue, right? Like that is what Purdue is in the Big Ten. Purdue is a place you go for resources and you want to keep climbing. Oklahoma State doesn't have to be that, but I think it's moved into a place in the college football landscape where the top up and coming head coaches in the country aren't going to view that as a place you can stay forever. They're going to view that as a place you can win in the short term and go. And I think that's just the reality where the job is right now.
So I think this is like an interesting question about, kind of the landscape of the coaching world in general, right? Because, I think of a place, or I think of a coach like Lance Leipold at Kansas, right? Where there are conversations that he had with Big Ten teams. Chris Kleiman, kind of a similar example, right? And it sort of gets into the question of like, what is the relative value of leaving? Not necessarily is this job better than this job, but is this job so much better? Is Minnesota so much better than Kansas that you leave that job for that job? I think that that's a legitimate question that coach are having to ask yourself. And by the way, in a world where you're getting paid $5-6 million to be at Oklahoma State, I think that that's a more difficult question than asking, do you want to go be at a program where you don't have the resource to necessarily compete? And again, this is a question that I think coaches have to ask themselves. Different coaches are going to have different perspectives on that, right? It's like, and again, like the other thing too, because like if Oklahoma State, for example, right, like when the elite of the elite SEC jobs came open, like sure, they can take whoever they want, right? Alabama, there's been
Mike
Tennessee.
Gundy tried to go to Tennessee.
Yeah, Tennessee, 100%. But like, I think that again, it starts getting into like if Mississippi State comes calling, are you leaving for that? If Arkansas comes calling, are you leaving for that? If Illinois comes, we'll see what Illinois is long term. But
the question, John, the question is, do Illinois you just said Illinois, that's one of them. But does Arkansas have more money and resource? I'm not talking about your salary. I'm talking about there's a rev share number that you have to hit to be competitive. Is Oklahoma State ready, willing, and able to spend that? Because you look like we'll take Oklahoma State and kind of compare it to another open job, Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is quite literally going to have a board of governors meeting on September 30th, next Tuesday, to basically approve $50 million additional to their athletic department operating budget. If they don't do that, then Virginia Tech is going to stay in a bad job category where they just don't have the resources to be a serious competitor in the next phase of college athletics. Where does Oklahoma State lie? Where is Oklahoma State in that paradigm and that pantheon? It's all well and good to think about it as this kind of conceptual thing, but it's a matter of dollars and cents, literally.
Well, Richard, let's just go through real quick, and we'll all three of us rank the jobs and how you view them and how you would take them. We don't need to spend a long time on this. Just 1, 2, 3. I'll start. It's Virginia Tech, Oklahoma State, UCLA. That's how I would rank it. Like, how would you?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. But I got to see if Virginia Tech is actually going to get this revenue thing passed. If they don't, I think Virginia Tech honestly drops to the bottom of the barrel.
This is still I'm looking at, this is not the most recent numbers, but this is 2023 distributions. Virginia Tech's revenue was above UCLA and Oklahoma State back in 2023-24. And if they add additional revenue streams to their budget, like I think they're going to be the most well-funded of all three of those schools, even with the Big Ten money flowing into UCLA.
I will say this. There's two things that have to be kind of factored in about that. With the ACC, the revenue distributions are now changing to more of they call them success initiatives, where they're literally, it's going to be kind of a keep what you kill in the sense of success. So it's kind of harder to peg at that. The other thing about the proposed $50 million per year over the next 4 years that Virginia Tech is hoping to get from its university, a heavy amount of that, almost half, comes from philanthropy. And the open question right now at Virginia Tech is what happens if you are not able to raise that money? What if you fall short? So even though Virginia Tech is telling everybody that they're pretty close to getting $50 million per year locked in, that $50 million number in and of itself is not necessarily hard and fast locked in. Some of it comes from student fees. Some of it comes from the university side. But a heavy, heavy portion of it comes from philanthropy, comes from donations. Guess what it's hard to do when your football program stinks? It's raise money. It's a difficult thing. So there are some, when you go inside on the Virginia Tech thing, there are some very, very interesting machinations there. We are going to continue this discussion, but we're going to take a quick break here first on the College Football Insiders.
Only CBS Sports can bring you big time during the heart of Saturday afternoons. It's big time.
It's big time. It's big time. It's big time.
On CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
Back here on the College Football Insiders, we're talking candidates for Oklahoma State and the now open Oklahoma State job. A couple very interesting ones on the list here, Chris, that you put together. Miami offensive coordinator Shannon Dawson and Oregon offensive coordinator Will Stein. I'll start with Will Stein. Chris, is Will Stein ready for a job right now?
I mean, his offense says he's ready for a job right now. And if there's one thing I know about college football, it's that schools like to hire young, up-and-coming offensive coordinators. They get jobs faster than anybody else. Kind of like in the NFL, how people falling off Sean McVay's coaching tree just tend to get
You mean
jobs.
like Zach Robinson?
Exactly like Zach Robinson, exactly. Young offensive coordinators putting up numbers tend to get jobs in college football. And Will Stein, like somebody who was a high school coach in my backyard like 5 years ago, is now one of the hottest coaches in the country, and for good reason. Like his offenses, I think, have been top 25 every year at Oregon. Going back to his time at UTSA, he had top 25 offenses with Frank Harris running the show there at quarterback for UTSA. And this is a guy that I think is going to be a candidate for, there are 3 open jobs right now. I could see him being a candidate for all 3 of them. He has ties to all 3 areas of the country in those regards. So yeah, I think Will Stein's going to be a super popular guy. I don't know if I'd put him at the top of this list in terms of candidacy, but he is a guy who's going to come up over and over again on these lists because he's a person, when you talk to people in the industry and people in agent circles, that people circle and highlight as a guy who's ready for one of those jobs.
And by the way, I don't think it's a coincidence that, frankly, every major Oregon assistant is coming up for jobs, right? Will Stein, offensive coordinator, Tosh Laffoy, defensive coordinator, and you mentioned Rashad Samples also as associate head coach. Like, yeah, you know what? I think it's cool and all to be a great offensive mind, and that's going to help him. But it's also the way that they've built an organization at Oregon is maybe just as important to managing the future. Because yes, I mean, they have, you want to talk about unlimited resource, right? Like even other coaches shade Oregon's unlimited resource, but they've also done a really good job of developing a structural organization that works in this era. That's what Dan Lanning has probably done better than any coach almost in college football. And if you hire a Will Stein, it's yes, to institute his really good offense, but it's also to come in and say, hey, how does Oregon do things and how do they maximize what they have access to? That's, I think, the thing that's going to really carry forward. Because again, I think all 3 of those guys could potentially be head coaches in 2026 just because of the way that Oregon has established themselves.
Well, the question is going to be, how do you do more with comparatively less? Like Oregon quite literally has all the money in the world. You saw that there is no more disparate gap between power conference schools than what you saw on the field just a few weeks ago when Oklahoma State went to Autzen and got absolutely embarrassed by Oregon. That is quite literally the difference right there in front of you of resources, of allocation, of coaching, of et cetera, et cetera. And I'm very interested in how any of the Oregon assistants that we just named, how he deals with being in a different place with considerably less resources. I had a conversation earlier today with somebody who's going to be interviewing for some GM jobs here pretty soon. He was kind of getting his stuff together, and he was throwing some stuff at me, like, what kind of coach would you pair with? And I was doing sort of the same with him. And he said, I think group of 5 coaches are interesting in the new rev share era because a lot of group of 5 coaches have done the work of putting their rosters together because they don't have either a GM or a large personnel department at least. And it was kind of an interesting kind of thought exercise to play that out. And he was like, I'm a guy looking to be a GM in the college space. What kind of coach do I want to pair with? And he was like, I don't know, man. Like, I think an up and coming G5 because he's done the work versus a power 4 coach who has had to be dragged into this era kicking and screaming, like Mike Gundy, or for instance, Brent Venables, who has changed, or something like that, who has been part of kind of the changing paradigm. It's just an interesting discussion, Chris.
Yeah, I think I might devil's advocate that for a second, Richard, which is like, I agree with the thesis there. That makes sense on paper, but I think what you're seeing is administrators shy away from G5 coaches climbing the track they used to have because they don't have the exposure to big time NIL recruiting in the way that you see some of these other people do. And like, yes, like somebody at Oregon might not be the head coach, but they're swimming in the waters that a lot of these people swim in. And sometimes that means more to an athletic director than experience putting together a roster with less. At Oklahoma State, I think that makes total sense. But like, if one of these bigger jobs comes open, say at Florida, like I don't think doing more with less is going to be a consideration in some of these cases. But it's an interesting dichotomy. But this is a job where I think you could straddle the line on either way. Like I think both can be effective because this is a program where development matters, but also you need somebody to help lift up the infrastructure and do more with more. Like Oklahoma State is a program that needs to find more and do more with more. So I think both avenues work.
And actually, I'm glad that you said that, Richard, because I feel like to a certain extent that up and coming G5 coaches are almost becoming an inefficiency right now in college football because everybody wants the hot young assistant. Everybody wants the SEC assistant. And so some really, really good coaches who have built rosters at different levels are getting overlooked. I mean, I look at somebody like Curt Cignetti right now, right? Like he was somebody who was James Madison's coach and Indiana's like, sure, why not? And now I think that we'd argue right now he's functioning.
I don't know if they went sure why not.
But I also think that the Curt Cignetti thing is a little bit different because Curt Cignetti brought a ton of great players. But what Indiana also has a group of boosters that are really well moneyed and some really, really deep ties to corporate funds. But they got those fellas together and said, folks, if you guys want to hang out in the cool basketball conference, they're not going to let us stick around if we don't care about football. Let's get things in the right direction. And they did.
I agree. But I think that, for example, with Curt Cignetti, right? He's the coach of James Madison as they transition up. He had to do a version of that at a smaller school, right? He had to do a version of that at a D2 school when he took that job, right? There's so many things that are asked of you as an up-and-coming coach that you don't necessarily have to do if you're Will Stein and you just get the checkbook, right? It's a different type of opportunity. I mean, I think, again, like it was so interesting to see the contrast, for example, in that UCLA versus New Mexico game, where you've got Jason Eck, who's this FCS assistant who became an FCS head coach, who became New Mexico's head coach, one of the poorest programs in all of college football. And he walks into a program that has money issues, certainly, but that has a $70 million check coming in from the Big Ten, that has a whole bunch of NIL money on the field, that has $1 million quarterback, and beat their butts up and down the field, right? So I think that if you're Oklahoma State, I think there's in some ways some inefficiency to hiring a program builder from the group of five level. And that's why, for me, one of my favorite candidates on this list is GJ Kinne at Texas State, because he's at a program that had never made a bowl game since moving up to FBS. And I believe it was 2012. They had one +500 season, didn't make a bowl game, long story. But he came there. He immediately settled the money a little bit. He's brought resource to this program where there wasn't before. He's won over administration and also helped coordinate administration as they brought in some new people, which Oklahoma State might be doing. He's recruited, of course, the state of Texas and Oklahoma. He has ties to both places, very strong ties. He also is an innovative young offensive coach who did it at Incarnate Word, has done it at Texas State. And by the way, his offensive coordinator and right-hand man, Mac Leftwich, is now the guy running roughshod with Texas Tech's offense right now. So, like, he, to me, checks so many of the boxes that you want as an up-and-coming coach in college football. I think, again, there's good cases for a lot of people, for the assistants, for somebody like Zach Robinson who transitions these eras. But man, I think that it is overlooked and underrated at this point to be able to go out there and just have done the job at a high level before.
I really like GJ Kinne as a candidate, I want to be honest. But I think, just to play a little devil's advocate there, it's the job at Texas State is different than the job at Oklahoma State. Is different than the job at Oklahoma, quite frankly.
For sure.
Like it's different jobs. I think GJ Kinne can do it quite well. but I'm just saying it's sort of the landscape.
Totally. I think, again, it's to me, like, that's why I make the Cignetti comparison, right? Because he did a version of Indiana at James Madison. Now, actually, James Madison is a more engaged program. That's a whole other conversation. But, like, he had to do some of the things at Texas State that he'll have to do on a bigger level at Oklahoma State. And there are a lot of people who aren't going to understand that, hey, I have to come in here and convince people that actually we need to spend money on football and on players. Like, that's something you're going to have to do at Oklahoma State. And by the way, you might be doing it with a new university president and a new athletic director.
Chris, tell me a little bit about Eric Morris. And I know, Shehan, you can obviously speak to him as well. Eric Morris is a very interesting candidate. I think he's going to be an interesting candidate for a couple of jobs. If Arkansas opens, for instance, I think he's going to be there are a couple candidates on this list that are also going to be interesting shouts for Arkansas as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can copy paste a lot of these names up to Arkansas if you wanted. I think the Arkansas pool will be a little bit wider, and you could go after some names that are maybe out of reach for Oklahoma State. But like a lot of these names, especially if Arkansas misses on maybe their first and second options, are going to make sense there when that job comes open. But Eric Morris is a really interesting name. Shehan is talking about this inefficiency of teams taking a guy who's built before. Like, Eric Morris definitely had to do that in Incarnate Word. He helped essentially relaunch that program. He turned them into an FCS powerhouse before he went to Washington State for a year with Cam Ward, the number 1 overall pick in the draft last year, who he helped find out of high school. Then he took the UNT job, and he's done an excellent job there. They're off to a 4-0 start. And I think we saw last cycle in a couple of cases, if you can get a play caller quarterback combo, you can start a program up very quickly. We saw that with John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle going to Oklahoma from Washington State. And I think there's going to be a lot of attractiveness for Eric Morris this cycle, not only for what he brings as a play caller. Like, he is one of the top play callers in the country offensively. He's put up points wherever he goes. But Sean wrote a story last week about Drew Mestermaker. He is going to be one of the top quarterbacks in the country this year. And he is somebody that a lot of people are going to be hollering at in the portal potentially. And you could potentially take both of them together to Oklahoma State. That's big time. Not that Oklahoma State doesn't have interesting quarterbacks on their roster. Haas Haney was really good before he got hurt. But yeah, I think Eric Morris is going to be a really interesting name. Obviously, has geographical ties there too. So he makes a lot of sense for Oklahoma State to at least consider.
Sean, when you sort of did that story in Mestermaker and you kind of looked under the hood there with North Texas, I know that's a program you're really close to geographically. What is it that you like about kind of what Morris is building there? They are a good team right now early on in the season.
Yeah, I mean, he is, like, we talk about the best quarterback developers and identifiers in the country. And, you know, I think that Eric Morris might be the best one that people don't really talk about. I mean, for people who don't know, like, he's the guy who found Cam Ward. He found Drew Mestermaker out of basically nowhere. He was a kid who never started a high school varsity game, and kind of lucked into him because he walked up. That's a whole other conversation. You should check out my story on cbsports.com. But I think that he's somebody that if you go to Oklahoma State, he's going to be able to do many of the things that he's done well at his previous stops. Like GJ Kinne comes up through the Incarnate Word world, actually is, like Chris mentions, the establisher. GJ Kinne is kind of the guy who gets to coast on the coattails a little bit, but he's come to North Texas. It's taken a couple of years to really get going, but they've recruited at a top of the American level the past couple of years. They've produced quarterbacks every year. In fact, they have 2 straight years of their quarterbacks putting up huge numbers and transitioning to the power conference level. Chandler Morris this year at Virginia, the latest example. I think that the big question that I have with Morris that I'm sure he could answer in an interview is, what's your plan on defense? Because he has been a little bit of the great air raid offensive coach with a struggling defense. That's changed a little bit this year. They brought in Skylar Cassidy.
I'm going to tell you right now, Sean, Skylar Cassidy is a name that you need to know for bigger defensive coordinator jobs this year. Like, that defense is going to be fine.
If I were Eric Morris, I'd I'd tell him to send out that Army tape and be like, this is as good as we can be. We can't be any better than this. But
they're top 30 in the country right now in yards allowed per play.
They're very good. They're very, very good. But that would be my big thing, right? Is I think that he's done a good job, and this is maybe getting a little too into the weeds. They hired an Iowa State assistant 2 years ago to run their defense, it kind of just didn't work for whatever reason, even though that felt like a good hire at the time. Well, Cassidy has come in, done a really good job on defense there, an American contender, like you mentioned. I would want to have a very frank and clear conversation with him about what is your plan on defense in terms of who can you identify, what systems are you looking to, where are you getting players? But those are all answerable questions for me. So I think that Eric Morris, again, is like you guys said, if they are able to maximize, I'm planning to be at the North Texas versus South Florida game on October 10th. That could be a battle of two future power conference head coaches.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. All right, guys, Oklahoma State job is open. We will have a lot of time to talk about it over the course of the season and over the course of the silly season as we well and truly get into that, even though things seem pretty doggone silly right now with a Tuesday afternoon firing of a guy who, quite frankly, will have a statue outside T. Boone Pickens Stadium once we're all done with it in a few years. Shehan Jayaraja, Chris Hummer, thanks for joining me. I'm your host, Richard Johnson, here on the College Football Insiders.